There is a number that changes everything about how you read Seneca. 300 million sesterces. That figure comes from a man named Publius Suilius, a Roman senator who stood up around 58 CE and accused Seneca of amassing this fortune in just 4 years of imperial friendship. Tacitus recorded the accusation. A Roman legionary earned about 900 sesterces a year. Seneca held 300 times the minimum fortune required for senatorial rank. Modern conversions are imprecise. Ancient economics do not map cleanly onto ours. But the direction is clear. By any method you choose, we are talking about a fortune in the low billions. Villas across the Mediterranean. Political influence second only to the emperor himself. And the same man who held all of this sat down and wrote, in letter 2 to his friend Lucilius, one of the most quietly devastating sentences in Western philosophy. It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who craves more. That sentence has been printed on 1,000 infographics. It has been stripped from its context and pasted over images of Roman busts. But the context is what makes it matter. Because the man who wrote it was not poor. He was not a monk. He was not performing renunciation from a position of comfortable obscurity. He was one of the 5 or 6 wealthiest people in the Roman Empire, and he knew exactly what money does to the soul, because he could feel it happening to his own. If you are over 40, if you have spent decades building something, a career, a house, a retirement account, a life that looks from the outside like it should be enough, then you already know the question Seneca was asking. You may not have his fortune, but you have the same knot in your chest, the gap between having enough and feeling enough. The suspicion that the security you worked so hard to build has become its own kind of cage. Seneca did not solve that problem, but he wrote about it more honestly than almost anyone, before or since. And the honesty is what earns the reading. Start with how he got the money, because the story is not clean. Seneca was born around 4 BCE into a wealthy equestrian family in Cordoba, Spain. His father, Seneca the Elder, was a successful rhetorician. There was inherited money, but the real fortune came from imperial politics. In 54 CE, the young emperor Nero ascended the throne, and Seneca, who had been recalled from 8 years of exile on Corsica, became his tutor and chief political advisor. Imperial gifts flowed. Seneca also engaged in money lending, and here the record turns uncomfortable. Cassius Dio, writing about 150 years later, claims Seneca lent 40 million sesterces to unwilling Britons at harsh interest rates, then suddenly called in the loans, a move Dio says contributed to the Boudiccan revolt of 60-61 CE. Scholars debate Dio's reliability on this. He was writing long after the fact, possibly with political motives of his own. Miriam Griffin, whose 1976 biography remains the standard reference, treats the charge as plausible but not certain. What is certain is that Seneca's wealth did not come from selling philosophy books. It came from inheritance, imperial favor, and finance. The money arrived through the machinery of empire, not through the practice of virtue. So when Suilius stood up in the Senate and asked, by what kind of philosophical wisdom had Seneca gotten so rich? The question landed. It was not merely political theater. It cut to the center of Seneca's philosophical project. And Seneca knew it. His answer is the essay De Vita Beata, On the Happy Life, written around 58 CE, almost certainly in response to attacks like Suilius's. Sections 17 through 28 address the hypocrisy charge directly, and what Seneca does there is more interesting than either his defenders or his critics usually admit. He does not claim to be wise. That is the first move, and it is the one most people miss. In the Loeb translation by John Bassour, Seneca writes, I am not wise, nor to feed your malice shall I ever be, and so require not from me that I be equal to the best, but that I be better than the worst. This is not false modesty. In Stoic philosophy, the sage, the person who has achieved complete wisdom, is described as rarer than the phoenix. Seneca is not claiming the achievement. He is claiming the practice, the work of becoming. And he is arguing that the work does not require being finished. The second move is subtler. Wealth, Seneca argues, is not intrinsically evil. Poverty is not intrinsically virtuous. In Stoic terminology, wealth is a preferred indifferent, something that is better to have than not, all else being equal. But that is not itself a moral good. The wise person, Seneca writes, does not love wealth, but would rather have it. He admits it into his home, not into his heart. The distinction matters. The question is not whether you have money. The question is what the money has done to you. This is where the essay earns its keep, and where most popular treatments stop too early. Seneca's third move is the test. Can you lose it? Not in theory, not as a philosophical position you hold while sitting comfortably. Can you actually lose your fortune, your house, your status, your comforts, and still recognize yourself? If yes, the wealth is a tool you are holding. If no, the wealth is a hand that is holding you. And the person who cannot imagine being happy with less, Seneca argues, is already poor, regardless of what is in the account. There is a practice that follows from this, and it is the most actionable thing Seneca ever wrote. Letter 18 to Lucilius, composed during the Saturnalia festival, Rome's season of feasting and excess, contains his most detailed prescription. In Richard Gummer's Loeb translation, set aside a certain number of days, during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, is this the condition that I feared? Read that last line again. Is this the condition that I feared? The specific practices: eat only bread and water or the simplest food available. Wear rough clothing, sleep on a hard surface, go without heat. Avoid all luxury. Duration, 3 or 4 days at a time, sometimes more. And the purpose, Seneca is emphatic about this, is not punishment. It is not asceticism for its own sake. It is not self-flagellation dressed up as philosophy. It is inoculation. You are training your nervous system to verify through direct experience that poverty is survivable. You are stripping the fear of loss of its power by walking voluntarily into the thing you fear and discovering that you are still there on the other side. The modern analogy is a fire drill. A fire drill is not a fire. But the person who has never practiced the exit will panic when the alarm is real. If you have a mortgage and a retirement account and a closet full of things you do not wear, this translates. Not as a command, Seneca is not commanding you, but as a question. Could you eat simply for a week? Sleep on the floor for 3 nights? Take the bus instead of driving? Not because you have to, because the exercise of choosing discomfort proves something that comfort never can, that your well-being does not depend on what you are afraid of losing. Now, the exile. In 41 CE, 17 years before De Vita Beata, the Emperor Claudius exiled Seneca to Corsica on charges of adultery with Julia Livilla. The charges were almost certainly political. Seneca spent 8 years on that island, rocky, sparse, remote. This was the first real test of his philosophy. Theory met weather and isolation and the slow erosion of status. 2 documents survive from the exile, and they tell different stories. The Consolation to Helvia, written to his mother, shows the philosophy under genuine pressure. Seneca argues with real conviction that he has lost nothing essential. What matters? His capacity for thought, for virtue, for philosophical work, traveled with him. The exile took his comfort, his position, his city. It could not take his judgment. This is Stoicism performing as advertised. But there is also the consolation to Polybius, written to one of Claudius's powerful freedmen. And it is transparently a bid for recall, flattery directed at the very emperor who exiled him. Scholars universally regard this as Seneca, at his least philosophically consistent. The philosopher of indifference to fortune was actively lobbying to get his old life back. Both documents are real. Both are Seneca. The person who could write with genuine composure about loss was also the person who wanted, very badly, to stop losing. This is not a contradiction that disqualifies him. It is the contradiction that makes him worth reading. Griffin characterizes Seneca as a philosopher who never claimed to have reached wisdom, only to be journeying toward it. The journey included lobbying. The journey included weakness. The journey continued anyway, and this is the point where the hypocrisy accusation reveals itself as something else, a defense mechanism. Brad Inwood, in his 2005 study, Reading Seneca, suggests that calling Seneca a hypocrite is a way of not engaging with his challenge. If the man who wrote about non-attachment was himself attached, then you do not have to ask whether you are attached. The flaw in the messenger excuses you from hearing the message. But Seneca anticipated this move. I am not wise, nor shall I ever be. He is not asking you to follow a saint. He is asking you to do the work alongside a fellow student. If you came to these texts in midlife, after a loss, after a transition, after sitting in a quiet house wondering what the decades of accumulation were for, you came the way most serious readers come, not looking for a hack, looking for an honest voice. There is a myth that Seneca voluntarily gave away his entire fortune. The record, per Tacitus, is more complicated. In 62 CE, as his relationship with Nero deteriorated, Seneca offered to return his wealth to the emperor. Nero refused. Seneca then reduced his lifestyle. Fewer banquets, simpler food, less display, but retained significant assets. This was a political negotiation, not a clean renunciation. The fire drill was becoming a fire, and the exit was being blocked. 3 years later, the fire arrived. In 65 CE, implicated, perhaps falsely, in the Pisonian conspiracy against Nero, Seneca was ordered to commit suicide. Tacitus provides the account, written roughly 50 years after the events and structured with literary care. Seneca opened his veins. His aged body, thin from years of simple eating, bled slowly. He asked for hemlock, in imitation of Socrates. Even that was slow. Finally, he was placed in a warm bath to accelerate the blood flow, and died from the steam. Before dying, Tacitus reports, Seneca turned to his weeping friends and said, "Where are your maxims of philosophy and the resolution you have been practicing all these years against threatened evils?" That line should stop you. He is not rebuking them. He is asking the question he had been asking himself for decades. He had rehearsed this. The voluntary discomfort, the praemeditatio malorum, the deliberate mental rehearsal of catastrophe, of exile, of death, had been preparation for this specific category of moment. Not this specific moment. No one can prepare for the exact shape of their death. But the category, the loss of everything, the question, when it is taken, do you still have yourself? By Tacitus's account, Seneca met it with composure. Not perfectly. The body resisted what the philosophy accepted. The blood was slow. The hemlock was slow. The human animal does not die on philosophical schedule. But the composure was real, and it had been earned through decades of practice, not through a single insight or a motivational morning. There is a temptation here that I want to name and refuse. The temptation is to turn Seneca's death into a triumph narrative, the final proof that Stoicism works, that the system delivers, that the rehearsal pays off in the performance. But the record is more honest than that. This is the man who also wrote the Consolation to Polybius, who lobbied for recall from exile, who held on to significant wealth even after offering to give it back, who practiced voluntary discomfort and also lived in villas. The composure at the end was real. So was everything else. And this, finally, is what Seneca offers that the infographics cannot. Not a clean story, not a system that produces predictable results. A practice, ongoing, imperfect, conducted by a person who knew his own contradictions and kept working anyway. If you have been trying to reconcile what you have with what you believe matters, if you have sat with the discomfort of owning more than you need while suspecting that need is not the point, you are not failing at philosophy. You are doing what Seneca was doing. The practice is not the achievement of indifference. The practice is the repeated, patient interrogation of your own attachments. Here is what it is not. It is not a clinical treatment. If you are struggling with genuine anxiety about money, or if financial stress is producing symptoms that do not lift, that deserves professional support. Seneca is not a therapist. Donald Robertson and others have traced specific overlaps between Stoic exercises and cognitive behavioral therapy. The premeditatio maps onto cognitive exposure, voluntary discomfort maps onto behavioral experiments. But the overlap does not make the ancient practice a medical intervention. It is one tool. It is not the only tool. If you came to these texts expecting a cure and found something else, a practice, a question, a companionship in difficulty, you received what the tradition actually offers. Here is what you can sit with. Not a command, a practice and a question. The practice. Choose 3 days this month. Eat simply. Sleep on a harder surface than you need to. Wear less than you usually would. Not to punish yourself. To ask the question, Seneca prescribed, is this the condition that I feared? Notice what happens. Not to your body. Your body will be fine. Notice what happens to your fear. Notice whether the gap between what you have and what you need is as wide as you assumed. The question, if it disappeared tomorrow, the account, the house, the accumulated comforts of decades, would you still be you? Not, would you be comfortable? Would you still be you? Seneca did not answer that question once and move on. He returned to it in letter after letter, year after year, through exile and return and wealth and reduction, and finally in a warm bath with opened veins. The question does not resolve. It renews. That renewal is the practice. Subscribe if you want Stoicism treated as philosophy, not as performance enhancement. The wise person, Seneca wrote, admits wealth into his home, not into his heart. The sentence is simple. Living it is the work of a lifetime he never claimed to have completed. Neither will you, neither will I. The work is not the epiphany. The work is the morning.